Hey everyone, welcome back to Bonsaifly. And today we're diving into a fun and rewarding little project, which is how to improve cheap bonsai material. In this video I'll be working on these 5 plants, which are bonsai material, pre-bonsai or bonsai at different stages of development. I will basically be performing different tasks on these plants to increase their girth, to make them grow more, and to increase the quality of these materials. Each of these plants will be getting a slightly different approach, but all of these are going to be working. I promise you that. I've tried them on other trees as well, and I thought it would be a fun little project to share with you guys, especially if you're a beginner and you do not have a lot of money to invest into bonsai. All of these plants were super cheap. For instance, this is a cutting that I did not pay anything for. This is my first ever bonsai tree, which is a standard hardware store Tigerbar Fus that I bought for about 15 euros. This ginseng ficus set me back 10 bucks. This Tigerbar Fus right here is just an air layer from this one that I took about 4 years ago. No additional cost, that's great. And this is a Cheflera or Hawaiian umbrella that I bought for I think 5 euros as a standard plant a couple of years ago and air layered into 2. So one thing all of these trees have in common is that they are stagnating, which is not something that you want in your bonsai trees. Now, what do I mean by stagnating? Obviously, each of these plants is in a different stage of development, with this one being the most refined and this one having the thickest girth, while this one is not even trained in any way for bonsai yet. But what they do have in common is that all of these still need to thicken up and all of these still need to grow more ramification, which is basically what makes a good bonsai material a good bonsai material. Now, you might have noticed that all of these are tropical plants. That's due to me starting out with a lot of these trees when I still had no outdoor space for bonsai. When I started bonsai less than 5 years ago, I only grew tropical trees in my living room. Oh, I only had one room, so these 4 trees right here, with the exception of this little one, I've had for a long time. I've had this one for, well, it's my first bonsai, so the entirety of my bonsai career, which at this point is close to 5 years. This one I bought about a half year later, so 4.5 years maybe. 4, closer to 4 actually. Yeah, this one I took as an air layer very early on from this tree. It was actually right in this place where this massive branch has grown now, and just put it over this vase that I found in some storage space because I thought it might make for a fun and redeeming, unusual little project in the long run, and I think it will, but it still needs to grow. And yeah, this one I just air layered to have 2, but nothing's really happening. The pot's very flat. All of these need work to improve. One thing that will be the same for all the work done on these trees is that we're gonna take a step back from them to eventually be able to progress with these trees. Now, the first plant right here is called a Brazilian rain tree. You know, some people call it Chloroleucon tortum, some people call it Pythicilobium. I don't know if I'm probably butchering that. So yeah, this is a pretty famous variety of tropical bonsai tree or material that can be used for tropical bonsai trees. Has these great little feather-like leaves. It actually gains some exfoliating bark as it grows older. It has spikes, so these I will need to remove in the long run. But yeah, this is a cutting that I received about 1.5 years ago from a bonsai colleague of mine and fellow bonsai YouTuber called Jelle. He has a bonsai channel called Growing Bonsai by Jelle. If you haven't checked them out yet, I highly suggest you do that. He's in my club. I took part in one of his giveaways on YouTube and was lucky enough to get myself a little cutting of this tree, which I hadn't found anywhere else. It's been a variety that I've been wanting to work with for the entirety of my young little bonsai career. But for the first couple of years I just couldn't get a hold of a Brazilian rain tree anywhere in Europe. They are so rare to find. It's very hard to import them nowadays, but he still had a larger plant. Took a couple of cuttings, rooted them, and then gave some of them away in a giveaway, and I was lucky enough to get myself one. And ever since I've done nothing except fertilize and water this tree, which you can see pretty elongated growth. If I do still have some pictures of how it looked when I first got it, I'm gonna add them into the video. It has thickened up a little bit. It is still tiny. I don't know if you can see that, but if you do, it's half the size of my pinky. So obviously for this one, the number one goal is going to be growth, and I'll show you how I'll be going about it in a minute. Now let's talk about the second tree, my first ever bonsai tree. A Tigerbar ficus, or Ficus microcarpa tigerbark by its botanical name. You can see there is a little bit of trunk on this. It was much smaller than this when I first got it. I have managed to sprout some aerial roots, although I'm not quite sure this one's still alive. I hope so. But yeah, the thing with this tree is that I do need to thicken up this lower part because there's some inverse taper right here, and I'm not going to be removing this branch. I've also always imagined this one as a banyan style tree, meaning that it would sprout different aerial roots, like for instance here, that then come down to the soil. But to be honest, I don't live in a tropical climate, and I have had this thing wrapped with sphagnum moss for almost 2 years, which only really produced this little aerial root here that I'm not even convinced is still alive. But other than this massive one right here, it doesn't really give me an easy time of sprouting aerial roots. Now I have other ficus trees that make it a little easier for me, but this one, whenever aerial roots start to sprout, they don't tend to survive. So that's something I'm going to be taking into consideration working with this tree. So main goal is going to be thickening up the trunk and some of these primary branches, because I'm pretty sure that after the thickening process will have taken place, I'm going to be cutting this back to stumps to develop a more tapered tree in the long run, but for now it's going to be growth and aerial roots. Now the third tree is this ginseng ficus. Now I don't know what your personal stance is on ginseng ficus. Most people don't like them. I don't like them either, but this tree is something of an experiment to myself that I've been trying to test out over the last couple of years. I've had mixed success, to be honest. Well, I have managed to get rid of the ugly grafting scar as far as possible so far, and this thing has thickened up. Its ramification has increased, and the quality of the ramification in terms of taper has increased as well. However, you can still see this ugly buttress that is very defining for ginseng ficuses. And most people that you see on the internet making bonsai trees out of ginseng ficuses will either air layer them right here. So they just take the top of what was given and air layer it, and then create a new tree from there, cutting away these big ugly roots. Or the other possibility, which I've done on my second ginseng ficus that I'm going to be showing you here for a second, is you just cut the graft away and let the tree sprout from there. Admittedly, the roots on this tree are a little more spectacular than they are here, which is, this one's pretty much just the standard ginseng. This actually has some interesting shapes so that I can actually use this as a thick trunk, looking like it has a big aerial root coming from here. And as you can see, it's back to its original foliage, while this still has its grafts on. Yeah, this one's developing much better. I've had this much shorter, and to be honest, I think it looks more impressive in terms of the quality of its styling already. Now the thing with this one is that I actually want to incorporate all of these common flaws of ginseng ficus into a tree that will eventually look like it's never been a ginseng ficus, but rather a very chunky, solid bonsai tree from ficus material. Now, how do I go about that though? Thing is, I am going to have to sprout aerial roots on this thing. I've tried this before, submerging this thing into soil and then just letting it sprout little roots, but I think I didn't leave it in there for long enough, because shortly after I took it out, all the little roots died. So I think I'm gonna have to give those more time to solidify, and then eventually I'll be able to unveil them. Now, as you can see, there are some places where roots have actually survived, and these will over time add to the nebari, but these still need to thicken up. So basically the plan for this thing is to get this tree to sprout aerial roots anywhere on the trunk. Up in the branch structure, up here, up here, up here, up here, up here, and have as many of them come across here as possible, possibly leading outwards here to increase the taper that this tree has. And over time, I hope that these will fuse with this big chunky root, and this butt crack in the middle right here will naturally disappear, leaving behind a very chunky broom style bonsai tree. Go over to the fourth one. This one is a air layered plant. As you can see, there isn't much shape to it. I saw this Dutch artist, I currently forgot his name, if I recall it, I'm gonna be putting it into the video, who basically does these little statues where he has statues of bonsai trees. These aren't living plants, but rather just statues made to look like bonsai trees that come out of vases, out of broken little vases and stuff. And I saw it and I thought, man, that looks so cool. And while bonsai itself is about depicting trees in nature, I thought, why not give this a little try? It's only an air layered plant. It didn't cost me anything. I had this vase that I found in some storage space just sitting around, and I thought maybe this could make for a cool process. Now, I've had this in here for, I don't know, I'd say at least 3 years. There was some sphagnum moss around this whole thing for the first 1.5 years, and you can see it hasn't closed this vase very well. Now, I do hope that it continues to grow on this vase in order to completely engulf it and make it look like it's completely atop here. You can still see there's like a little space up here that you can look through. So this tree's main goal will be to thicken, to enclose this vase more, and potentially to develop some root base so that I can work on this maybe starting next year. And this tree is the last one on the list for today. It's a Schefflera arboricola, or also called Hawaiian umbrella. Now you can see that it has 2 trunks, and this trunk has already got its woody color, meaning it's older than this one. Actually, this one only sat atop this other one right here at some point, and I just layed it off and just planted it next to it, and it has grown. I can see that a lot of these fine roots have died though due to the flatness of the pot. And yeah, while it does have some nebari, it's just not spectacular material, and I've started to notice that while it's not only hard to ramify this, especially low down, if I ever want to get ramification on the lower parts of this tree, I'm going to have to cut it back significantly. But also there just isn't much interest. It's just 2 straight sticks in a pot. Now, I was hoping for this to sprout aerial roots, but I don't think it's gonna in this flat pot. Now, I've seen people in tropical climates use the trick of putting Scheffleras into flat pots, and once the pot is completely filled with roots, the Schefflera will try to search for nutrients in another way, and that's when they send out aerial roots. But in my climate, it just doesn't seem to work, even though I try to keep this thing moist and spray it with water frequently. Today I will be adding some more interest to this, while also setting it up to thicken more and develop a nicer root spread and potentially aerial roots. Alright, so with this little tree, you can see it's been left to grow freely. I haven't repotted it or done anything to it since I received it. You can see it's been placed on a bed of porous clay, so the roots have gone down into the soil, giving this tree more strength. I actually had to rip this big one up just to free it earlier. I'm going to be repotting this into a larger pot, and I'm going to be showing you a little trick on how you can start the bonsai training without setting the tree back by much while still having it in its growing phase. So this is more preparing the bonsai material more than it is performing actual bonsai techniques. But there's a little trick I'd like to show you with this one. And by the way, all of the things that I'm showing you here today, they will not only work on tropical trees, except for anything including aerial roots, but they will also be applicable to basically any evergreen, deciduous or deciduous broadleaf tree. So let's get into it. So all that we are going to be using to improve this particular tree here before we take it out of its old container is a slightly bigger training pot that we're going to be potting this tree into. while also using a broken old training pot for one particular trick, and that is, in order to improve the nebari or root spread at the bottom of this tree, you need the tree to grow its roots into a lateral direction. However, trees grow slower when they're growing lateral roots than if they're growing downwards, which is due to the tree having less space in a flat container that is forcing the roots to grow laterally, but also because when there's more soil and the trees can grow downwards, they reach more nutrients, they thicken up quicker. However, you do still want to train a nebari on a tree that is going to be converted into a bonsai tree. And this is where your broken pots can come in handy, and I'll show you how in a minute. So basically, if you have a broken pot like this one that you are potentially never gonna be using again, which, it only has this one crack, but soil's gonna fall out, it's gonna be a whole mess, and it's really not gonna be used for anything else. You can kind of recycle parts of this pot to make your small bonsai trees grow quicker. In order to do that, you're gonna have to remove the bottom of this pot with scissors. Now that I have my large pot, my little cutout bottom from the smaller broken pot, and my plant plus some extra soil here, I can start the work. It's going to look like this. I'm going to fill up some of this pot with soil. Then I will be placing this on top of the soil, and then I will be placing this plant atop this thing, and then I will be filling the whole thing up with soil again, which then forces the base of the roots to spread somewhat laterally. Now some of the roots are going to come through here, which is fine. We want some water to still be able to pass down here, but eventually, if I leave it in here long enough, there will be a nebari on top of this thing, and everything that comes below and isn't going outwards will just cut away. But that's going to be another 2-3 years down the drain, so for now we just gotta perform the work. Okay, so now that it is in here and the growth of the future nebari is safe, I'll be performing one more little trick just to get this to move a little more upright. As you can see, it's leaning over quite a bit. I can't place this thing right in the middle of the pot, obviously, because there's this little bottom of the cutout other piece, but I can just push it in here like this, and then I can just bind these upper branches to this pole right here. It's growing a little more upwards. Going to do the same on this side, and then I can leave the tree to its own devices again for quite a bit of time. Now the last important step after each repotting is to water your tree until the water coming from the bottom runs clear, which means any unwanted soil particles have been flushed out. As you can see, it's a whole lot of dirty water right here. And it is ever so slowly becoming more and more translucent. And there we go. As you can see, no more dirty water, and your tree is good to go. Okay, now let's get started on the second tree. Okay, so here you can see the second tree. What I'm going to be doing with this tree is I'm going to place it in a so-called tie pot. Now, I've used this pot a bunch of times. As you can see, it's not exactly clean anymore, but it's just a training pot made out of very chunky solid plastic. It has these little knobs here to tie some branches down, which is possibly something I might look into with this tree. And it's a so-called air pruning pot, meaning it guides the roots towards air, and once they do, they ramify. It actually speeds up the root formation of a tree. On the website it says up to 20%. Now, I don't know if that's true, but I'm gonna use it anyway. Also, this is not an advertisement. I'm not affiliated with Typod. Yeah, and also we're going to be using some cuttings of this very tree that I took, I don't even know when. But all of these are rooted, meaning that I can potentially use them in a way that I graft them onto the tree, creating aerial roots. I'll show you how in a minute. Now the first step will be to remove this tree from its current container. I think it's actually a very nice flat blue pot that matches very well with the ficus. However, it is very shallow, and this tree has been in here for about 3 years, and I think what this tree actually needs is more room to grow, and a bigger container is going to be helpful in that. Now you can see this is super root bound. Look at these things, they've been completely swallowed up. And you can also see that I didn't properly water this the first time when I replanted it into this container a couple of years ago, as all the dirt has accumulated at the bottom, which is normal, but in this amount you can really see that I forgot to clear water on the first watering, and it has solidified. So yeah, I'll be doing better next time, but you can see a bunch of healthy roots. I mean, this thing is going to bounce back in no time, and it's been growing vigorously for a while now. Yeah, promising project. Now here you can see all of this is solid chunk, so there is a root base finally starting to emerge after 3 years in a shallow container, which is a great point to start from for the next process, which will be thickening up more while maintaining a lateral root growth. Now you can see this root right here is crossing here. I am not going to remove it though, because all of this will be buried in soil in a short while again, and then over time it will just fuse into the trunk and just thicken up. With fast growing evergreen broadleaves or deciduous material, you can really perform this. This would also work on maples, especially tridents, and probably even hornbeams, stuff like that. Now, as you can see, the aerial root that I managed to sprout right here died, which is unfortunate, but I'm going to be leaving this little stump, because I have seen in the past that aerial roots tend to sprout more easily from softer wood, and right here there's a crack in the bark, so this might actually be a good thing to do. I am going to remove all of the excessive root growth to flatten this thing out a little more again and get rid of the elongated growth, like that. But I don't want to take away more than this, because this tree mainly needs strength. All of this is flaring pretty radially, as you can see, and yeah, this will make for a good trunk base. Now I will fill up the bottom of this tripod, only a thin layer, with very coarse pumice. That's about all I need. Now I'll spread that out evenly so it's relatively flat. Now I'll add my tree and I'm going to wire this in order to stabilize it in the pot, which is very important because I might want to pull this tree lowest branch a little down on my way out, so to speak. Okay, now I'll be filling this up just a tad more, just to cover the root base. I'm gonna be using some of the old soil, actually, because it's still intact. And over time, these trees produce a numbers of helpful bacteria in their soil. And I found that sometimes if you want to have them bounce back fast and there's enough room in the pot for some old soil, I wouldn't recommend this on a new pot that has very limited capacity, because you're gonna need the structure of the soil more in the long run. But since I plan on having this in here for a maximum of 3 years, and also to thicken this up quickly and bounce this back as fast as possible, I am just going to use some old soil. Alright, so this has one very long shoot that I'm not going to be using, so I'll remove that because I think I might have another use for this. Alright, I'm gonna set this aside for just a second. Now the next step will be to get these cuttings out of their pots, removing any weeds beforehand, obviously. And then I'll see how I can potentially use these to fake aerial roots on the tree by planting them in the same soil and connecting part of the cutting with the tree, and over time they will hopefully fuse, giving the impression of aerial roots, although it's actually a rooted cutting. So I have the tree here, I have the rooted cuttings, as well as the one cutting I just took from the tree. I'm going to be placing this in here as well. These usually do have a pretty high chance of actually sprouting roots, so if this shows any new sign of growth, I know it'll be safe to connect this to the main tree and to fuse over time. And then I'll have it in the pot as well. Just one more option. Yeah, usually very, very helpful. Before that, I have to use some tie-down wires on these branches though, because I will need to lay them out a little more in order to be connected with aerial roots. And watering again. You can see the dirt coming out right there. And now it's starting to run clear. Perfect. Alright, 2 finished, 3 to go. Now this might actually be one of the simpler things I'm gonna do. I have this large deep pot here and I'm going to immerse this as deep as I can in here. I'm only gonna be filling the bottom up with a little bit of soil and then put this entire thing in here. And before I do that, however, I have to inflict little breaks in the bark in order to promote root growth. But instead of using a knife and cutting deep, I actually think I'm gonna use some sandpaper to do that, because it'll just barely scratch the bark. The wound will be minimal and quick to heal, but it'll still fulfill the same purpose. Here I have some very fine grit sandpaper, and I'm just gonna use this on the bark. You can see this smoothen, and only here have I broken the skin, so to speak, the bark. And here, this is what I want, just very small little openings, and then I'll place it in here. I'll be opening up little spots all along here. Right, you can see the little wounds. I think that's enough. Alright, as you can see, this one does have a nice flat trunk base already, which is a great start of a Nebari. And now all that needs to happen are more aerial roots along here. So I'll put it in the deep pot close to the bottom like this. And watering again. Alright, 3 done, 2 more to go. Alright, so this little tree, this is actually possibly gonna be the easiest work of the day, because I will just have to get it out of this pot and just place it in a larger pot. I don't even think, since it's gonna be a deep pot, I'm gonna have to tie this down, so this should be done within a minute. Here it is, it's just a basic clay training pot, pretty wide. As you can see, I'll be able to bury this quite a bit. Okay, let's go. Alright, all done. And next round of watering. Alright, 4 done. Only 1 more to go. The last one is a Schefflera. It'll need more thickening up. I'd love some aerial roots if they come. But more than that, since the material right now is just plain boring. I mean, there is some good root structure down here, but this tree needs a ton of growth in order to thicken up to a point where it actually has some interest. Now obviously, as with other species shown today, specifically the ficus trees, this tree can produce nice aerial roots, which can fuse and, you know, just as ficus aerial roots do, and over time create a more interesting trunk structure. And in the long term, I'm hoping that all of this, at least on the lower parts, merges through aerial roots, but that still doesn't give me enough interest for some reason. I just keep looking at this thing. I've had it for over 4 years, and I've lost interest in this particular bonsai tree so many times, but then again I always think, man, I'd really love to find out how cool this tree can be. So I have decided that I am putting it over a stone. which will add some interest, especially since the root growth is strong on this tree. It'll just grow over the tree, hopefully engulf it in full at some point, and then spread some more aerial roots on top and gain a thicker trunk, while I hopefully manage to create a nice structure up in the tree sometime. So what does this tree need? A larger pot, obviously, but also a pot that's deep enough to envelop the stone and the root base completely. And so I picked another tie pot. Now I will be tying the stone to the bottom of the trees. I think it's still 2 trees at this point, and then I might not even have to tie it down here. We'll see. Let's get started. Alright, I think this will be pretty solid in here. Alright, stable. Alright, one last big watering. Alright, all 5 trees finished. As you can see, some took way longer to prepare than others. I'd say this one definitely took the top spot in terms of time used. These 2 possibly took around the same time. This one took a little longer than these 2, and this one just took a couple of minutes. So very different levels of effort have been applied today, but I wasn't even planning on making this like a list kind of video, but in the end these are basically 5 methods that you can use to increase the value as a material for bonsai for your cheap plants. Now with all of these, time is still of the essence, not in the regard that you should hurry up and get it done, but maybe you should. No, I'm speaking more about letting these things grow further without any interruption. So I'm pretty sure that in terms of all of these, they'll be allowed to grow freely, completely untouched for at least 1 more year. There isn't much left for me to tell you regarding these plants. I hope you learned something today. I hope that these plants sparked your interest in advancing cheap material, because I do think it's a very beginner-friendly way of starting bonsai. You can't really do much wrong to a $15 plant, because even though it might die in the process of you learning bonsai on it, it's only going to be a cheap plant. But if you do manage to successfully keep your cheap plants alive, you might just take them all the way. And that's what I'm trying to do with these. After I've practiced bonsai for a while and have more attractive material to work with, did I think to pause and take a look at the cheaper material that I've had for a long time, because these do stagnate if you don't take the next step. And even though you keep up the shape, cheap base material usually has the flaw that it's just, well, cheap young material. It doesn't have much interest, it doesn't have thick trunks, it does not have a lot of ramification. And in the case of all of these, this will now be remedied over the next 1, 2, 3 years, I'd say. And from there on out, these will make much better materials for bonsai. Now, I do hope that those of you watching who are bonsai beginners or don't really know where to start yet, if you do have the patience, if you don't have plants that you've already practiced your skill on, these do make for great learning material in terms of wiring and stuff. I've learned so much wiring and pruning with this tree, as well as repotting. But if you do have the patience, I suggest you start out with these steps, because it'll take much longer because the growth of your trees will be much slower once they go into shallow bonsai pots, once they receive regular pruning. And to be honest, a good trunk base and a good trunk line, as well as good tapered ramification, are what make a bonsai great. So if you have cheap material that you're just looking at and not really doing anything with, I recommend try something like this. Just let it go for a while and then come back to it, and you'll have improved material that you can then apply your by then improved techniques on. Alright, this has taken up quite some time. I hope you guys learned something. I am certainly a little exhausted from all the work performed on these trees. If you did learn anything new, if this was interesting to you at all, or you just liked the video, consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Leave me a like, leave me a comment if you have any thoughts. I really do appreciate that more than you think. And other than that, I hope to see you in the next video.